Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. Ever done something you're not supposed to do? Ever realized that after the fact maybe you should have just listened? Well, such is the case for the poor fellow in tonight's story, a hard-working lad looking for thrills and kills in all the wrong places. I call tonight's wretched writing 58 Crates.
When I was in my early 20s, I had this really cool job. The pay was meager, benefits were basically non-existent, but the fringe benefits far outweighed any detriment. The job was a janitorial position, cleaning offices and a supply warehouse at night after their hours of operation. Typically, I'd begin my day at about 6 o'clock at night, finishing up at about 2:30 in the morning. So, what was so great about this late-night job with crap compensation? Honestly, the work. Because my shift began after all other operations shut down, and because the square footage was small enough to cover on my own, this meant that there was no one around to bother me. The work was really easy, too. Empty trash and recycling bins, vacuum and mop, wipe down bathrooms, and even that was easy as most of the daytime employees seemed to really take pride in keeping things clean anyway. I was allowed to smoke out back on the loading dock, and allowed to smoke whatever I wanted, mind you. I took my breaks whenever I wanted, and if I finished up early, I could simply sit in the employee lounge and play a game on my phone until quitting time. The only things I couldn't do was leave early, as I had to punch a time card in and out, and I was supposed to stay out of Holding Bay 4, the closed-off area adjacent to the loading docks. Leaving early was something I never did, but inspecting Holding Bay 4 is something I did frequently. For whatever reason, there were no cameras or security system in place in order to ensure that I stayed out, and even though the door was always locked, I knew where the day shift supervisor kept the key. But really, there was never anything in there anyway. It was just a dark room as large and windowless as it was vacant. Well, except that last night. I should have listened, and never gone in there in the first place. That night, my shift began as usual. I had my run so well learned and down pat, performing my job duties was mostly muscle memory at this point. As a result, trash and recycling, mopping and vacuuming, and of course the bathroom work had all been completed within about 5 hours or so, giving me some time to sit and watch a few episodes of Full Metal Alchemist on Netflix via my smartphone. As I put my card away in the custodian's closet, I went outside for a smoky treat and a breath of crisp night air as I tossed the trash into the large compactor, hitting the button and watching the safety lid close over top of it as the sides moved inward, crushing the trash within. I watched the process complete itself before snuffing the roach and heading back in, my intended destination being the employee lounge. But something made me stop dead in my tracks, causing me to literally take a few steps backward and turn to my right, performing a double take to ensure that I had indeed seen it correctly. On the locked door to holding bay 4 hung a loose leaf of white paper, black text scrawled across its surface. As many years as I had worked here, I'd never seen anything on this door and in this room. Off limits or not, the thing legitimately felt neglected and disused. So obviously, this odd sheet of paper instilled much curiosity. I steadily approached the door and inspected the note pinned to its surface. Delivery to LHM, order number 549826, QTY 58, hazardous material. Honestly, the only portion of this information that made any sense at first was hazardous material. I don't work in shipping, and rarely do I order things, so it took a moment for my mind to recognize that QTY stood for quantity. I still had no idea what was contained within, but I knew it had to be hazardous, and whatever it was, there were 58 of them that had been ordered. It wasn't until I foolishly gave in to curiosity and opened the door enough to take a peek inside, flipping on the light and gazing at the contents within, that I finally understood what LHM stood for. Scrawled across the side of every single one of those stacked crates, in black lettering, read the phrase, "Property of Lockheed Martin." This should have set off major alarm bells in my brain. Lockheed Martin satisfies contracts for the military. Everything from state-of-the-art hybrid vehicles to automated intelligence programs. I should have known better than to go poking around any further, but the claws of intrigue had dug their way too far beneath the surface of mental flesh to release me so easily. Almost autonomously, leaving the door open behind me, I walked towards that stack of large boxes piled high. Now only feet away, I could see that upon each crate resided a packing and shipping slip, but the ones visible and facing outwards were too high up on the stack for me to read clearly. So I began encircling the perimeter until reaching the back of the pile. One or two crate-like boxes near to the floor had their forms facing outward. I squatted and began to read the words to myself, but I was mostly surprised at the lack of information rather than what was provided. There was no barcode, no return shipping address, mostly just useless collections of what seemed like random numbers and letters underneath large, bold words that read, "Caution, handle with care." What the fuck was this thing? I tapped my knuckle on the side of the crate, trying to possibly gain understanding via audible vibrations, but I heard nothing that would lend me any insight. Only a loud crash that came from the other side of the pile. I stood with a startle and ran to the other side of the room once again to inspect what had happened. When I first saw the crate, a feeling of dread washed over me as I assumed I had just broken something far more expensive than I could ever hope to pay for. One of the crates appeared to have fallen from the top of the pile and crashed to the floor, smashing the thing open. I bent down to look inside, inspecting the contents. A whirlwind of intrigue swept over me like a waterspout, thinking I may finally learn what the hell was in this thing. But I saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. And soon, that feeling of wonderment was replaced by something much more sinister. For whatever had been inside of this thing stunk to high heaven like an animal, because the crate reeked like that of an uncleaned kennel, and when I scanned the immediate area for whatever may have been residing within, I saw something that filled me with a sudden odd sense of impending doom, though, for a moment, I didn't know why. What I did understand is I had left the door open, and if there was indeed some sort of animal living in that crate, it was certainly on the loose now. I stood to my feet once more with a determination to hopefully find this thing, put it back, and save my job. But I couldn't stop asking myself over and over, what the fuck is this thing? I left the room and shut the door behind me, locking it to ensure that there wouldn't be any more mishaps. I crossed the expanse of that large loading bay and headed towards the offices on the other side, all while searching for movement in the near dark open space, peering between aisles of shelves and racks, but seeing nothing. However, the light of the nearby offices began calling for my focus, reinforced by the open door and the bright lights shining through from the other side. I stepped up to the aperture, turned back for one last look inside the bay, and then shut the door before altering my line of sight to now face the office area. What I saw shocked and terrified me. When I saw the papers scattered across the carpeted floor, cubicle walls knocked over, computer equipment knocked aside and left in disarray, I wondered at both how in the hell this could have happened without my hearing it, and what my restitution would be regarding paying the company back for the damages after I got fired. But those thoughts were short-lived, because the claw-like gouge marks, running in rows of 4 perpendicular to one another, scarring mostly everything in sight, including those knocked-over cubicle walls, desks, and much of the torn carpet. And I knew that none of those trivial things mattered. There was something much more critical here on the line beyond my job or financial restitution. Whatever this thing was, it was clear that my very life hung in the balance. I began slowly backing away, retreating into the opposite direction of the chaos and debris that lay before me, when a low, rumbling bellow froze me in my tracks. I didn't want to, but I knew I had to turn and see what was behind me, for whatever now resided there meant to do me mortal harm, and of that I was sure. I slowly turned my head to look over my shoulder, and within the shadows and flickering lights of the hall behind me, I could see a looming mass, one that stood tall and dark, very much humanoid in shape, but certainly not human. There was something wrong with its body structure that I could not yet define, being silhouetted by the flickering light that surrounded it. And in that same instance that I saw it, I watched the form lower and hunch itself close to the floor, like a dog or large cat, but its lower limbs bent and contorted back like some kind of fucked up grasshopper, readying itself to pounce. I wasted no time and instantly faced forward and ran for the nearest place of safety, and as I sprinted down that long office corridor, I could hear the thing giving chase behind me like a galloping horse. The first place I could locate to duck into was back inside the warehouse and loading bay, slamming the door closed behind me once again. I then took off down one of those long stretches between the aisles, skids of products stacked upon high shelves towering over me on both sides, bottlenecking me like a city alleyway. And that's when I heard the door slam open from back at where I had re-entered this place. This meant that I had only gained a few feet of unnoticed progress, and whatever was tracking me down just as likely knew right where I was as it did intend me grievous harm. Whatever it was fast, and as such I knew I had very little time to react. Quickly, I darted to my right and hastily squeezed myself behind some large rolls of printing press paper, the lot of them large enough to completely conceal me from eyesight. A brief moment after I had gotten myself settled, I heard the collision of meat or flesh against the concrete floor, and it was getting closer, slowly now, plodding forward and ever closer to me. This thing was stalking me, and though I could not see it too clearly through the crack of a space between the two standing rolls of paper that I now peered through, I did, in fact, see its dark shape emerge. Those teeth were first, pointed and dripping with foul, translucent slime, only a few inches from the floor and about eye level with my prone self. This thing was still on all fours and was sniffing the ground, like it was trying to smell where I was. I instantly found myself praying that this thing could not track me in such a way, knowing the thing was only about a foot or two away from me, nearly arm's reach. If this thing could in fact detect my scent, I was surely screwed. The thing took another lumbering step forward, the teeth disappearing from my line of sight, instead replaced by the spectacle of the thing's right eye, bulbous, yellow, and a pupil that was very similar to that of a cat's. But the thing moved around much like the way a fisheye would, twitching as it scanned in all directions, unblinking as it appeared to have no eyelids, and my mind still grasping for equilibrium. I struggled to keep my breath still and calm, for I knew that if I were to make the slightest of sounds, this thing would hear me. I believed with all my heart that I was about to die, but to my surprise, the creature simply kept moving forward, ever so slowly. I laid there, listening, waiting, trying not to make a sound for what seemed like a small eternity. And then everything instantly went pitch black. The motion-operated lights switched off, apparently detecting no movement for such a long period of time, leaving me in resolute darkness. My stifled breaths began to hit my throat, and I found it exponentially more difficult to keep my breathing calm. It was as if the darkness that enveloped me amplified every little sound, including my thudding heart, inflating my sense of dread and imminent doom. But as the fog of trepidation began to dissipate just a little, I realized that maybe whatever this thing was, it had now left. And that's why the lights had turned off. I knew I couldn't stay in this shelf forever, and I figured that if I could just make it to my vehicle, I could inform the authorities, who would be much better equipped to take care of this thing than I was. Ever so slowly, I crept from behind the rolls of paper, sliding my body out into the aisle in a push-up position before rising to my feet. I stood motionless and just listened for a moment. Nothing. Just silence, nothing more. I turned in the direction of the loading docks and the trash depository, which would give me access to the outside. It was with my very first step that the lights kicked back on in a flash, detecting my movement and bathing me in illumination. My heart dropped when what I feared the most rang true in my ears. The rushing sounds of oddly cadenced footsteps, running and getting louder with each reverberant clap. This thing now knew exactly where I was and was sprinting or running in my direction. I dropped all pretenses of stealth and simply took off running for those doors in the back, hoping I would reach them before it would reach me. I could hear the thing's claws and padded feet colliding with the concrete floor behind me, and their rapid succession and increasing loudness told me that the thing was gaining quickly. The door in the back was not only within sight, I had left it slightly ajar, and this was likely the best thing I could have done for myself without even knowing it, for if I had to stop and mess with the handle even for a second, the thing would have certainly trounced me. For as I threw my shoulder into the door, causing the thing to bust open with a bang, I could swear I felt the thing's breath breathing down my neck. It was right behind me. Running down the graded platform, before I reached the end, I instantly and simultaneously juked right and crouched, coming to a complete stop, keeping my body low to the ground. The thing leapt right by me, brushing the hair on the back of my head as I stopped and ducked. I couldn't have been more lucky. My plan had worked. The thing flew through the air past me, off the end of the platform, and into the compactor. I had already pressed the button before the thing had even landed, purposefully stopping at the control panel. Within seconds, the lid had closed over top of the thing, and from within, loud banging noises could be heard emanating as the creature pounded furiously at the doors above it, desperately trying to get free. A few moments later, and wild howling and monstrous bellows could be heard resonating from inside as whatever this thing was slowly crushed to death. One last high-pitched monstrous shriek that was ultimately cut short told me that the thing was finally dead. I watched on with silent amazement at the inanimate object before me, thinking of the lifeless monster within and all its existence implied. I meandered back inside after a few more moments and mindlessly wandered towards the back, away from the loading docks. I looked around the warehouse and the offices beyond, seeing the utter destruction this thing had caused. I found myself utterly apathetic, my mind set on the one and only thing I could settle my disequalized thoughts upon. I quit. A notion solidified as I turned to shut the door to the warehouse area behind me. But as I did, I couldn't help but look beyond the aisles of racks piled high with products, past the conveyors that fed into the loading docks themselves, and instead focused directly upon that locked door with a shipping order taped to its surface. I was done with this job, for I cannot know for certain what that thing was that had broken out and nearly ended my existence. But what I do know is that whatever was in that crate, there were 57 more.
Well, if 2's a couple and 3's a crowd, then 57's a riot. Well, only if you're doing the killing. But if the lack of original horror is the loneliest number that you'll ever do, just remember to drop back in here again next weekend. And until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.